"Excuse me, you're hurting me. Please, I just want my mom." Those 7 words, spoken by a 9-year-old boy in a voice so small it barely rose above the engine hum, would eventually be heard by 11 million people, replayed in congressional hearings, and printed in the opening paragraph of a federal report that changed how every major airline in America trained its crew. But in the moment, they were spoken in the narrow economy aisle of Flight SD 447 somewhere over Tennessee. No one with the power to stop what was happening chose to use it. This is the story of what happened before those words, during them, and long after, and of the woman who had spent 7 years quietly, methodically building the authority to make sure they would never need to be spoken again. But we begin with the boy. Gate B12. Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport on a Tuesday morning in early October, when the air outside was just beginning to carry that first thin edge of autumn coolness, and the terminal smelled the way all airports smell before 7 a.m. Recycled air and burnt coffee, and the particular anxiety of people who are about to be somewhere else. Elijah Caldwell sat in a blue plastic seat with his legs dangling because he was 9 years old, and the seats at gate B12 were built for adults, and he was reading a book about black holes and dying stars with the focused intensity of someone who has found the exact right thing at the exact right time in his life. The book was thick, a library copy with a cracked spine, and someone else's pencil marks in the margins. Little stars drawn next to the passages that had surprised them, which told Elijah something about the kind of person who had read it before him. He had been reading it for 3 days. He was on Chapter 7. Chapter 7 was about event horizons, which the book described as the boundary around a black hole beyond which nothing could return, not matter, not energy, not even light itself. Once you crossed an event horizon, the book explained in the careful language of a writer trying to make the impossible feel imaginable, the outcome was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. Elijah read that passage twice, then dog-eared the corner of the page, pressing the fold flat with his thumbnail the way his grandmother had taught him, making it sharp and permanent. He was wearing navy sneakers with a small hole beginning at the left toe, dark jeans, and a gray hoodie with a pocket in front where he kept his boarding pass folded in thirds. His backpack sat between his feet, olive green canvas with a small iron-on rocket patch on the front pocket, slightly crooked because he had ironed it on himself last summer, with his grandmother's supervision, and a piece of wax paper. Inside the backpack, the space book. A sandwich in a Ziploc bag, 2 granola bars, a pencil case, and a small spiral notebook where he wrote down questions he wanted to ask his mother about things he didn't understand yet. His grandmother, Loretta, sat beside him in the next seat, already dozing, her head tilted toward her left shoulder, and her church hat, a deep burgundy felt with a small cloth flower listing slightly to one side. She had been up since 4 in the morning, helping Elijah pack, double-checking that his boarding pass was in his hoodie pocket, making sure he ate something before they left the house. She was 67 years old, and her arthritis was worse in cold weather, and she had still gotten up at 4 without complaint because her grandson was excited about going to Chicago to see the Bean, and that was sufficient reason for anything. Elijah looked at her hat, noticed it had shifted, and reached over carefully to straighten it without waking her. He did this with the precise gentleness of a child who understood that some people needed their rest and that kindness was often most itself when it went unnoticed. Then he went back to his book. Around them, the gate filled with the particular population of an early Tuesday morning flight, business travelers with rolling suitcases, and the 1,000-yard stare of people who had done this so many times it had stopped being travel and become simply movement. A young couple sharing earbuds, a man in a fleece vest talking too loudly on his phone about a quarterly report. No one paid Elijah any particular attention, and he preferred it that way. His mother had raised him to be comfortable in his own company, and he was. He could sit with a good book and a question forming in his head and feel entirely sufficient. He was watching a man in an orange vest mop the same 6-foot patch of floor for the 3rd time. Not because it was dirty, Elijah had decided, but because the man was thinking about something and the mop was just what his hands were doing while he thought when the gate agent announced boarding for Group 1. The sound of it pulled his grandmother back to wakefulness. She startled slightly, patted her hat, looked at him with the specific expression that grandmothers have when they wake up and find that the person they love most is sitting right there, and everything is fine. "That's us, baby," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. "I know, Grandma." He closed his book carefully, tucking it into his backpack beside the sandwich. "I've been ready." She laughed, a soft, warm sound, and let him help her gather her bag, which was heavy, because she had packed an extra cardigan for him, even though he hadn't asked for one because October in Chicago, she'd said, and that had been the end of the discussion. They joined the boarding line, and Elijah held the line's pace without rushing it, even when the woman directly behind them sighed with the impatience of someone who had somewhere more important to be. Loretta moved at the speed her body allowed, which was slower than she used to move, and faster than she had any obligation to apologize for. Elijah matched it one hand on the strap of his backpack. At the jet bridge door, he paused for a half-second and looked back at the terminal, at the high windows going gold with morning light, at the mopman still working his patch of floor, at the ordinary enormous motion of a place where people were always arriving and departing and beginning things. He couldn't have said why he paused. Some feeling not quite dread, not quite premonition, more like the particular awareness of a moment before it becomes memory. "Elijah," Loretta said from ahead of him. He turned and followed her down the jet bridge and into the plane. Dr. Naomi Caldwell had boarded 20 minutes earlier through a separate gate entrance, the way that people at her level of the organization always boarded, not with ceremony. She hated ceremony, but with the practical efficiency of someone whose schedule operated in 15-minute increments and who had learned long ago that airports rewarded people who moved through them without hesitation. She was 41 years old, and she looked at this particular moment in seat 3A with her tablet open on her lap and a coffee going cold in the tray table. Cup holder, like someone's extremely competent aunt, the kind who fixed things at family gatherings. Who knew exactly what to say to the contractor who had read the fine print of the contract before anyone else had finished the cover page. She wore a simple charcoal blazer over a white shirt, dark trousers, flat shoes. No jewelry except a thin watch. No company badge visible. Her ID was in her purse, and it would stay there because the entire point of today was that no one on this aircraft would know who she was until she decided they needed to. Naomi had been with Skyward Airlines for 18 years. She had started at 23 as a flight attendant on the Miami-New York corridor, where she had dragged a beverage cart through turbulence in a too-small uniform for 3 years, and learned in the granular and unglamorous way that only direct experience teaches exactly what it felt like to be unseen. She knew how a passenger's eyes passed over you without landing. She knew the particular quality of being treated as furniture, present, functional, not quite human. She had carried that knowledge with her through every promotion, every rung of a climb that had taken 18 years and brought her here to the COO's office on the 14th floor of Skyward's Atlanta headquarters. And she had never once decided that what she had felt in that uniform was something she could afford to forget. Her tablet screen showed a grid of employee complaint data color-coded by resolution status, and she was reading it the way she read everything thoroughly without skimming with the patience of someone who understood that the important things were usually in the details that everyone else had moved past too quickly. One name appeared in the data with a frequency that was not statistical noise. Flight Attendant Brenda Hollis, Employee Identification Number 52-114, currently assigned to Flight SD-447 as lead cabin crew. 19 complaints filed against her over 16 years. 19 complaints, each one reviewed and closed by the same regional director, Frank Hollis. Same last name. Different floor of the same Skyward regional office in Dallas. Brenda's older brother promoted to his current position 6 years ago, which was 3 months after the first serious complaint against Brenda had landed on a supervisor's desk. Of the 19 complaints, 17 had been filed by passengers of color. 15 had been closed by Frank Hollis with language so similar across the cases that Naomi had 2 months ago run a text comparison and found that 11 of the 15 resolution notes shared at least 60% of their phrasing verbatim. The phrase passenger misunderstood crew instruction appearing in 9 of them, like a form letter that someone had stopped bothering to vary. She had known all of this for 8 weeks. She had been waiting specifically and deliberately for one more documented incident, something witnessed, something recorded, something that happened in real time in front of people who could not be managed after the fact. She had learned from the previous 19 complaints that paper alone was not enough when the person reviewing the paper was a brother protecting a sister. She needed something that didn't require Frank Hollis's signature to become real. Her phone lit up on the tray table beside her coffee. A photo from her mother sent at 6:47 a.m. Elijah at the boarding gate, grinning with his full face at whoever was holding the camera, holding his boarding pass with both hands like it was a certificate of something important. The gap where his front tooth had been last month was already closing, she noticed. Children's faces changed so quickly. She had been meaning to take more photos. The caption read, "He asked if black holes make noise. I told him to ask you." Naomi looked at the photo for a moment longer than she meant to, then typed back, "Tell him to come find me in seat 3. If he needs anything, tell him to just ask." She hesitated, then added, "Any time, for anything." Her mother's reply came in under 30 seconds. "We'll be fine. Stop worrying so much." Naomi put the phone face down on the tray table and returned to the complaint data, but the slight softening that had come into her expression at the photo did not entirely leave. She was a mother before she was a COO in the way that certain facts about a person exist prior to and beneath all their official ones. She scrolled to complaint number 1 in Brenda Hollis's file. Filed 7 years ago. Boston to Miami route. The complainant described asking for napkins after a beverage was spilled on her, and being told by a flight attendant with platinum blonde hair and a tight bun that she was being uppity, and that perhaps she would be more comfortable flying in a section better suited to her. The complaint had been routed to Frank Hollis, who at the time had been a mid-level supervisor rather than regional director, and it had been resolved in 36 hours with a form letter and 3,000 bonus miles. Naomi read the description of the complainant black woman, early 30s, business class, traveling alone. She closed that file and opened the next one and kept reading until the forward cabin door sealed and the engines began their low-climbing roar beneath her feet. Elijah saw her for the first time from row 19 about 40 minutes before everything changed when the flight was still in that particular suspended state of pre-departure engines. Warming overhead bins, filling the small rituals of people arranging themselves into the postures they would hold for the next 2 hours. She came through the economy cabin from the front, pushing a pre-departure checklist on a tablet, her movements carrying the crisp, slightly aggressive efficiency of someone who had long ago decided that the world should accommodate her pace rather than the other way around. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, with platinum blonde hair pulled into a bun so geometrically precise it looked architectural, her uniform pressed into lines that had no room for softness, her name tag catching a flash of overhead light as she moved. The tag read, Hollis. Her posture was immaculate in the particular way of people who have learned that authority is partly performed through the spine. She stopped at row 14, where a South Asian family, a father, a mother, 2 small children, one of whom was already asleep across his mother's lap, were arranging their carry-ons. The father asked politely and quietly whether there might be an extra blanket for the sleeping child. Brenda's smile was immediate and complete, the kind of smile that existed entirely on the surface of a face without touching anything beneath it. She said she would check. Her voice was warm, practiced, precisely calibrated. Then she moved on, and she did not check, and the family didn't ask again. She passed row 19 without stopping, but Elijah caught the moment her gaze dropped to him, a full second, maybe a second and a half. The kind of look that wasn't curiosity, but inventory moving across his face, and his worn sneakers, and his library book, and his backpack with its crooked rocket patch, and then moving on the way. You move your eyes past furniture. She didn't speak. She didn't slow. She simply registered him and filed him somewhere and continued up the aisle. Elijah watched her go, then looked back at his book. He was rereading the Event Horizon passage, the one about the point of no return, and something about the encounter sat in the back of his mind with a low, unspecific unease that he couldn't have named if someone had asked him to. His mother had told him once, pay attention to how people treat others when they think no one important is watching, because that's when you see who they really are. He wasn't sure who Brenda Hollis was yet, but he had noticed the smile that didn't go all the way to her eyes and the blanket she didn't bring, and the way her gaze had moved across him like a scanner rather than a person. He went back to his book. The star at the event horizon, the book explained, would be stretched and compressed simultaneously by tidal forces, a process astrophysicists called spaghettification, which Elijah thought was a genuinely excellent word for something terrible. Up in business class, Naomi observed Brenda's entry into that section of the plane from behind the screen of her tablet, watching with the particular attentiveness of someone who already knows the pattern and is simply waiting to see it confirmed. The transformation was immediate and complete. Brenda's body language shifted the moment she crossed the business class threshold. Shoulders softened movements, slowed, voice gained 3 degrees of warmth. She laughed at a white passenger's comment about his weekend in Scottsdale, leaning in slightly, performing genuine interest with the fluency of long practice. She refilled another passenger's orange juice before he could ask, appearing at his elbow with the quiet unobtrusiveness of a person trained to anticipate. When a woman in 2B dropped her magazine, Brenda retrieved it with a small, self-deprecating smile as though she were delighted to have the opportunity. The same hands, the same uniform, an entirely different person. Naomi typed one note into her tablet, differential service behavior confirmed. Business class versus economy. Same crew member, same flight, same hour. Near the forward galley, a young flight attendant named Devin Marsh watched Brenda work the business class cabin with an expression that was not quite readable, something between professional assessment and the particular wariness of someone who has learned that certain colleagues require a specific kind of attention. Devin was 32 with the careful stillness of a person who thought before he spoke and meant what he said when he did. He had been on this route for 8 months. He had submitted one informal concern about Brenda Hollis to his supervisor 4 months ago and had received in response a brief email suggesting he focus on his own performance metrics. He had not submitted another concern. But he had not stopped watching either. He caught Elijah's eye as he moved through economy with the pre-departure juice cart and paused. "What are you reading?" he asked, nodding at the book. Elijah held it up so Devin could see the cover. "Black holes," Devin said. "Heavy stuff for a Tuesday morning." "They're actually really interesting," Elijah said with the earnest confidence of a child who has not yet learned to be apologetic about enthusiasm. "Did you know that time slows down near a black hole? Like the closer you get, the slower time goes." "I did not know that," Devin said, and his tone made clear that he genuinely hadn't, and that he found it worth knowing. He handed Elijah a juice box, moved on. In the rear of the business class section, Brenda had noticed the exchange. Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly, a small contraction around the eyes, a fractional compression of the lips, and then it was gone, smoothed back into the performance, and she turned to offer more coffee to the man in 4A, who accepted it with a smile that she returned as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Atlanta fell away beneath them as the plane climbed through the low morning overcast and broke into clear sky above where the light was different, sharper, and cleaner and without shadow, and the city below became a circuit board of roads and rooftops shrinking toward abstraction. Elijah pressed his face briefly against the oval window, watching the ground organize itself into the geometric patterns that only became visible from a distance, and thought about how many things looked different depending on how far you stood from them. Then he settled back, opened his book, and read about how stars died. The chapter explained that not all stars ended the same way, that a star's death was determined by its mass, by how much gravity it had accumulated during its life, and that the most massive stars didn't simply fade, but collapsed inward under their own weight with such sudden catastrophic force that the collapse bounced and created an explosion visible across the universe, a supernova. The word meant roughly new star, which Elijah thought was interesting, that the most violent thing a star could do had been named for beginning rather than ending. He wrote the word in his spiral notebook, then wrote a question beneath it. Is it new because something new comes after, or new because it was the first time anyone saw the light? He would ask his mother when he found her in seat 3A. Loretta slept beside him deeply, and without apology, her arthritis having made last night difficult, and the 4 a.m. wake-up having made this morning longer than her body preferred. Her church hat had shifted again during takeoff, listing toward her right ear, and Elijah straightened it for the second time with the same quiet care as before. She slept through it. He tucked the spiral notebook into his hoodie pocket beside his boarding pass and returned to the book. Up in seat 3, Naomi had her tablet open across her knees and was working through Brenda Hollis's complaint file with the methodical patience of someone performing an act of witness as much as investigation. She had the complaint records, the internal correspondence, and the resolution notes, and she had laid beside them on the tray table like a parallel document the personnel timeline showing Frank Hollis's promotions, transfers, and salary increases against the dates of Brenda's complaints. The correlation was not subtle. Frank had received his first significant promotion 11 months after signing off on Brenda's 4th complaint. His second promotion had come 2 months after a particularly detailed complaint from a black doctor who had been told his business class seat was needed for a passenger with higher tier status had been closed with the now familiar phrase about misunderstood crew instructions. Naomi had been building this file for 3 months, and for 3 months she had been asking herself a question that she kept approaching from different angles, without arriving at a satisfying answer. At what point does a pattern become a verdict, and what are you obligated to do when you recognize it? She had known in the abstract and institutional sense that people like Brenda Hollis existed within the organization, that the complaint data showed them distributed throughout the airline's workforce like fractures in a structure that had never been properly inspected. She had known it. She had implemented training programs and oversight committees and anonymous reporting systems. And the complaints had kept coming, and Frank Hollis had kept closing them, and she had kept not knowing the specific names behind the data. Now she knew one name, and in an hour she would know whether she had enough. She closed the tablet and looked out the window at the cloud layer sliding past below them, and thought about Elijah asking whether black holes made noise the specific quality of curiosity in a child who has decided the universe is interesting enough to interrogate, and allowed herself for a moment to simply be his mother suspended above Georgia, grateful for the ordinary fact of him. The hour passed, the way quiet hours on airplanes do in the particular suspension of altitude, where the world outside the oval windows is irrelevant, and the world inside the aircraft is temporary, and the time between departure and arrival belongs entirely to whoever is on the plane. Passengers read, worked, slept. Devon moved through the economy cabin with the beverage cart efficient and warm, making small conversation with the passengers who wanted it and leaving alone the ones who didn't. Brenda stayed largely in or near the business class galley, visible from the front of economy, but not moving through it. Elijah finished the chapter about supernovas and started the next one, which was about neutron stars. What sometimes remained after a supernova, city-sized and incomprehensibly dense, rotating hundreds of times per second, and emitting beams of radiation that swept the universe like lighthouses. He thought about the mop man at the gate, still working his patch of floor, still thinking, and wondered if some people were like neutron stars, spinning and dense, and sending out light that most people couldn't see, but that was there regardless. He was deep enough in this thought that he almost didn't notice when his body reminded him with the undeniable practicality that bodies have that he had had a large orange juice at the gate and had been airborne for an hour and needed to use the bathroom. He looked at Loretta, who was sleeping the sleep of someone who had earned it. He thought about his mother's words. "If you need anything, come find me, just ask," and the specific comfort of knowing that she was 40 feet forward in seat 3. Close enough to reach, waiting to be found if he needed her. He unbuckled his seatbelt carefully so the click wouldn't wake Loretta. He tucked his book under his arm. He started toward the front of the plane. The aisle was clear. He moved politely, staying close to one side. A woman in row 16 glanced up from her phone and smiled at him, and he smiled back briefly. He felt fine. He felt easy. He was 9 years old, and he was on an airplane, and his mother was 40 feet away, and the universe was full of neutron stars, spinning their invisible light into the dark. He was 8 steps from Brenda Hollis's cart when she looked up. The cart was positioned diagonally across the aisle in a way that was not quite accidental, angled enough to fill the full width of the passage, blocking it not with a wall, but with an implication the way certain people block things without quite committing to the act. Brenda was restocking it from a service compartment on the left side, her back half turned, hands moving through the inventory with the mechanical focus of someone who has done this thousands of times and does not need to look at what she is touching. Elijah stopped. He stood in the aisle, a polite arm's length from the cart, and said, "Excuse me, ma'am." The ice clinked as Brenda rearranged a tray of bottles. She didn't look up. He waited the way he had been taught to, giving people a moment before repeating himself, not assuming rudeness before the evidence supported it. He counted silently to 5 the way his mother had told him to when he was younger and impatient. Except now he was older and patient by nature, and the counting was simply habit. Then he said it again, slightly quieter. "Excuse me." Brenda straightened slowly, the kind of slow that communicates something, that this is an inconvenience, that she was involved in something more important, that the interruption is being tolerated rather than welcomed. She turned to look at him. Her eyes moved across him in the inventory way he had noticed before, unhurried traveling from his sneakers to his backpack, to his face and back to the sneakers, spending time in each location the way an assessor spends time on a property she has already decided isn't worth much. Then she said, "Where do you think you're going?" "I need to ask my mom something," Elijah said, and his voice was easy, unhurried, because he had done nothing wrong and had no reason to expect that to be a problem. "She's in seat 3A. She told me to come find her if I needed anything." The laugh came immediately short and nasal, rising from somewhere in her chest with the practiced quality of a response she had used before. Not amused, dismissive. The kind of laugh that wants its target to feel the distance between where they are and where they think they are. "Seat 3A, Brenda said, and the way she said it made the seat number sound like a claim she had already decided was fraudulent. Business class. She crossed her arms, her weight settling back onto one hip with the confident ease of someone who has no expectation of being challenged. "Sure it is, sweetheart." The word sweetheart landed the way she meant it to, as a door closing, as a verdict delivered in the syntax of endearment. "She really is," Elijah said, without defensiveness. Because he wasn't defending himself, he was simply restating a fact. "She told me to come if I needed anything. She said to just ask." Brenda leaned down toward him, her face coming into his space in a way that required him to make an effort not to step back, because stepping back would mean something he didn't want it to mean. Her eyes up close were a pale blue-gray and entirely uninvested in what she was about to say. "You know what I think? I think you're making things up." I think your grandmother is sleeping somewhere back in economy and you're trying to sneak past the curtain into a section of this aircraft that your ticket does not entitle you to access." Elijah's cheeks warmed. The warmth was the specific heat of being accused of something you haven't done in front of people who are listening by someone with a uniform and a clipboard and the architectural authority of a bun that does not permit argument. "I'm not lying," he said. "Back to your seat," Brenda said, straightening up. Her voice had shifted. It was flatter now, less interested in performance and more interested in efficiency. "Now, please." "But I really need now." Her hand landed on his shoulder. It was not a gentle hand. It was the hand of someone who had decided this conversation was over and was now transitioning from words to facts. It gripped and it steered, and Elijah felt the force of it, not enough to knock him down enough to make her point about who was in charge of what happened next. He tried to hold his ground gently, instinctively, the way a person holds ground when they know they're right and haven't yet understood that being right is not the operative variable in what's happening. "Please, ma'am, I just need to—" I said, "Move." She pushed. The push was not violent. This was the thing about it that was hardest to reconcile. It was not violent in the way that broken furniture is violent or shouting is violent. And so the people who witnessed its beginning hesitated, as people always hesitate in the face of harm that is careful enough to stay just below the threshold of the unambiguous. It was a push in the way that a door closing on your hand is a push. Controlled, directed, saying something very clearly while retaining the technical ability to claim it had said nothing at all. Brenda's second hand joined the first, both on his upper arm now, her fingers pressing through the sleeve of his hoodie, and she steered him backward with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned the exact amount of force required to move a small body without producing a mark that would show. She had not calculated correctly this time. Elijah stumbled backward off balance and reached out instinctively with his free hand, but found nothing, just the air of the aisle and the passing edge of a headrest that was too far to grip. He caught himself, found his footing, and looked up at her with an expression that was not fear, exactly, but its immediate neighbor, the look of someone trying very hard to understand the rules of a situation whose rules keep changing. "Please," he said. "Please." I just want to find my mom." 3 words inside that sentence. Not "I want to go to business class." Not "I have a right to." Just my mom. The simplest sentence available to a person in distress. "Your mother," Brenda said, and the slight pause between those 2 words carried the weight of everything she had already decided about who his mother was and where she was and what she was, is wherever she belongs. And you belong back in your seat. She pulled harder. Both hands, now the grip tightening past steering and into something else. Something that left marks, and Elijah stumbled forward. Not backward now, forward, because she had changed the direction, was walking him, now hauling him back toward economy, with the purposeful momentum of a person who has committed to a course of action. The man in row 15 looked up from his laptop. He was middle-aged white in a charcoal business suit, and he had the brief, specific expression of someone who has seen something they cannot pretend they haven't seen, and is in the process of deciding whether the social cost of responding is worth the moral cost of not responding. He opened his mouth. Miss Brenda's head turned toward him with a precision that stopped the sentence in his throat. "Sir, this is a crew matter. I'll ask you to let me handle it." Her voice was not raised. It was worse than raised. It was calm, the way a professional stays calm when they expect to win, and the man in row 15, having taken the measure of that calm, looked back at his laptop and said nothing more, and would spend a considerable portion of the next 6 months thinking about that moment. Brenda continued moving Elijah backward down the aisle, her hands firm and inexorable, and she began to speak in a voice pitched to carry, not shouting, not needing to shout, just loud enough that the people in the surrounding rows could hear her clearly and understand that she wanted them to. Some children, she said, with the tone of someone delivering a lesson to an audience rather than a person, think that the rules of this aircraft don't apply to them, that they can go wherever they choose, access whatever they like, and when redirected by the crew, that their stories will be believed, and the crew's judgment will be questioned. She pulled him past row 17. On this aircraft, I am responsible for the safety and order of this cabin. I make the rules here, and the sooner you understand that, the better for everyone. Elijah's eyes were wet. He had been holding the tears back since the grip first closed on his arm, holding them with everything he had, because he had decided in the way that children make decisions that require enormous and invisible effort, that he would not cry in front of her. He would not give her that. He had done nothing wrong. He knew he had done nothing wrong. But his arm hurt, and the faces of passengers were watching him with expressions he couldn't fully read, and the humiliation of being moved through a public space against his will by someone in a uniform was a specific and terrible thing, and the tears fell anyway silently without his permission. "I didn't do anything wrong," he whispered. "That's what they all say," she replied, and there was something in the flatness of it, the complete absence of consideration that this particular child might be a different case from whatever case she was filing him under, that was more devastating than anything she had said yet. His backpack swung as she pulled him, hitting the armrests on both sides of the aisle, and somewhere in the motion the zipper on the front pocket worked open slightly and the spacebook began to shift inside. He felt it happening, the slow slide of the book working toward the opening, and he tightened his arm against his body, trying to stop it thinking in the way that people think about small things when large things are happening, that he could not lose his place in Chapter 8. Devon appeared at the far end of the aisle, emerging from the forward galley with a service tray in his hands. He saw the scene, all of it at once, in the single second of comprehension that trained people have, and he set the tray down on the nearest flat surface and reached into his jacket pocket for his crew management tablet, with a deliberateness that was not panic and was not hesitation. It was decision. The sound of it was specific, and it would stay with every person who heard it, long after the other details had softened and blurred the squeak, drag squeak of rubber soles on aircraft carpet. The sound of a child's sneakers fighting friction as his feet struggled to keep pace with the force pulling him backward. The sound being made not by someone running or falling, but by someone being moved against their will at the speed of another person's conviction. Squeak, drag, squeak. Row 16 passed on Elijah's left. A woman in a window seat, 50s reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair, who had been watching the encounter from the beginning with the growing horror of someone who has not yet decided what to do, reached for her phone with hands that were not entirely steady and pressed the camera icon without looking down at the screen. She held it level and she recorded steady and deliberate, not because she was certain of what she was doing, but because some instinct older than certainty had told her that this was something that needed to exist outside of this moment, that this was something that should not be allowed to simply disappear into the recycled air of an aircraft cabin and become a story a child told to adults who hadn't been there. Row 15. Elijah's backpack swung, and the corner of it caught a headrest, and the jolt of it yanked him sideways, and Brenda's grip tightened in response rather than releasing, pulling him back into line, and he made a small involuntary sound, not quite a cry, not quite a gasp. The sound a person makes when pain arrives unexpectedly from a new direction. "Ow," he said, small and precise. "You're hurting me." "Then stop resisting," said without looking at him, her attention on the path ahead, navigating the aisle with the focused efficiency of someone completing a task. Row 15. The man who had tried to speak before was standing now fully out of his seat, and this time there was someone beside him, a younger man across the aisle who had put his phone down and was on his feet as well. The older man said louder than before, "He is a child. He is not resisting. Please." Brenda's response was immediate and loud enough for 4 rows to hear clearly. "Sir, interfering with crew operations on a federal aircraft is a violation of federal law. I am asking you to return to your seat." The authority in it was absolute, the kind of authority that has been used so many times in the same situation that it no longer requires thought, just deployment. The older man held his ground for 2 more seconds, then looked at the younger man across the aisle, who shook his head slightly, and they both separately sat back down. And they would both separately spend time afterward understanding what it means to let that happen. The tears on Elijah's face were falling freely now, not with noise, but with the particular silence of a child who has learned that crying loudly in public makes things worse, who has calibrated his grief to produce minimum attention while feeling maximum pain. The cabin light caught them thin and bright as his head turned slightly from side to side with the motion of being pulled. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said again, and the repetition of it was not stubbornness, but the specific persistence of someone trying to maintain contact with the truth when everything around them is insisting otherwise. His space book slid fully out of the open pocket of his backpack and hit the floor of the aisle behind him. He heard the impact, the flat smack of a library book on carpet, and turned his head to look back at it, its pages fanning open, the spine flexing. "My book," he said, the way people say "my book" and mean something larger and more essential. The specific grief of a child watching the thing they love most in the current moment become a casualty of something that has nothing to do with them. Forget the book. Brenda kept moving. Row 17. A teenager in an aisle seat had his phone at chest height, recording without making it obvious he was recording. A man in the row behind him had been recording since row 16. The woman in the window seat was still recording. In the space of 45 seconds, 3 separate angles of the same event had come into existence, and not one of the people holding those phones had spoken to each other or coordinated in any way. They had simply individually arrived at the same understanding of what was happening and what needed to be done about it. A woman 2 rows back said loudly and without hesitation, "You need to stop. He's a child." Brenda didn't look at her. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. This doesn't." The woman said, "Yes, it does. I have a son his age." Brenda kept moving. Row 18. Elijah's feet were moving faster now, stumbling forward and catching and stumbling again, his sneakers making their awful sound against the carpet, and his free arm was reaching out and touching nothing, and the tears were still falling silently, and the arm that she held was throbbing with the specific deep ache of pressure applied for too long, and he was thinking in the way that the mind goes very quiet and specific in the middle of overwhelming things about the event horizon, about the point beyond which the outcome is no longer a possibility, but a certainty. And he thought, "I don't want this to be the certainty." Then a voice cut through the cabin, not loud, not raised, but carrying in the way that voices carry when they hold complete authority and do not need volume to demonstrate it. "What in God's name?" Row 19. Loretta was standing. She had come fully awake somewhere between row 16 and row 18, and she was on her feet in the aisle with her church hat still slightly crooked from sleep, and her eyes wide and her hands shaking, not with weakness, but with a specific kind of fury that belonged to people who had seen too much of the world to be surprised by it, but had never learned to be unaffected. "Let go of my grandson." Her voice carried down the aisle with the authority of 67 years of not being silenced and not intending to start. Brenda released Elijah at his row. Not gently, the release was a statement, a controlled conclusion, the way you set something down when you want it to be clear that you chose to put it there. And Elijah stumbled forward the final 2 steps and caught himself on the armrest of his seat, his chest heaving, his arm burning his face wet. He turned and looked back down the aisle at the path he had been dragged. 11 rows. He could see his spacebook lying open on the floor 4 rows back, pages bent, spine up alone in the middle of the aisle. Elijah sat down in his seat and held his arm against his body, and the throbbing was there, steady and insistent, and he looked at his sleeve, and the fabric was wrinkled in the precise shape of where her fingers had been compressed into parallel ridges that mapped the grip exactly. He did not push the sleeve up to look at what was underneath. He wasn't sure he wanted to know yet. Loretta reached him in 4 steps fast for a woman with arthritis, and her hands went immediately to his face, both palms cupping his cheeks, turning him toward her, her eyes moving across his features with the terrified thoroughness of a person checking for damage that they are praying they won't find. Her hands were shaking. Her face was doing 2 things at once, trying to be calm for him and failing to contain the fury that was working through her like something that had been compressed for too long and had finally run out of space. "Baby," she said, soft and urgent. "Are you hurt?" He nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again, because all 3 answers were true, depending on which part of the question you were answering. "My arm," he said. She reached for his sleeve. He let her push it up. The marks were already showing 5 distinct ovals of red and deep pink, arranged in the pattern of a hand, 2 on the inner arm, and 3 on the outer, the kind of marks that would develop into something darker and more defined over the next several hours. Loretta looked at those marks for a long moment without speaking. Brenda had not moved from her position in the aisle 2 rows up, and she was already doing what Naomi, watching from the front of the aircraft, would later describe in her report as real-time narrative construction, the specific and practiced behavior of someone who has been in this position before, and knows that the first version of events to reach official ears tends to become the version that persists. She had her crew radio out. Her voice was professional and completely composed, each word chosen with the deliberate care of someone building something rather than reporting something. "This is Hollis lead cabin crew, flight SD-447. I need the captain informed of a disruptive passenger situation in the economy section." Minor male passenger seat 19C repeatedly refused crew instructions, attempted unauthorized access to restricted cabin sections, and his traveling companion is now being verbally aggressive toward crew. "Requesting possible family removal upon landing. Documenting as incident case SD-447-18. She paused. 3 violations. Loretta's head came up. 3 violations. He needed to use the bathroom. He is 9 years old. "Ma'am, your grandson violated FAA regulations. He asked to find his mother. You grabbed him. You dragged him down this aisle in front of all these people." Loretta's voice was not wavering. It was the voice of a woman who had survived things that required the development of a voice that did not waver, and she was using it now. "His mother is Dr. Naomi Caldwell. She is in seat 3A. And you had better. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to lower your voice and return to your seat, or I will add your behavior to this incident report as well." The threat was surgical. Loretta felt the shape of it, the way it would work, the way the report would read, the way complaints from black grandmothers about how their grandsons had been treated always seemed to find themselves reframed as the complaints themselves being the problem. And her jaw set, and she sat down beside Elijah and put her arm around him, and did not lower her voice, but did stop speaking because she had learned in 67 years the difference between situations where speaking helped and situations where something else was needed. Devin had been documenting since the moment he saw Brenda's grip on Elijah's arm at row 16. He was standing now near the forward edge of economy crew tablet in both hands, entering observations with the focused precision of someone who has decided that what goes into the official record matters enormously, and that it will be entered correctly. Time, 8:47 a.m. Location economy aisle rows 16 to 19. Observation. Lead attendant. Hollis applied bilateral grip to minor passenger arm. Sustained contact for approximately 90 seconds across 11 rows. Minor did not resist physically. Minor verbally requested release multiple times. Grip marks visible on minor's right arm. Documentation photographic. He took 3 photos of Elijah's arm from a distance that included Elijah's face, Loretta, and Brenda in the same frame, establishing context, and sent the full documentation packet to the crew management system to Captain Reyes's crew notification channel, and to Naomi's corporate inbox in that order, within 4 minutes of Elijah's release. Then, he set his tablet in his jacket pocket and went back down the aisle 4 rows to pick up Elijah's spacebook. He smoothed the bent pages carefully. Chapter 8, the Neutron Star Chapter. The pages fanned open to a diagram of a pulsar sending its beam of light into the dark, and he closed the book gently and walked it back to row 19 and handed it to Elijah without ceremony. "Here you go, buddy." Elijah took it, held it. His eyes found Devon's for a moment, and Devon held the eye contact long enough to communicate what he needed to communicate. "I saw what happened. I've recorded what happened. You are not invisible," and then moved on because there was more to do. The man in row 14 was still standing, his phone still angled at the scene, and he looked at Devon as Devon passed, and Devon gave him a single small nod, and the man understood the nod and kept recording. Brenda addressed Loretta one final time with the calm finality of someone issuing a verdict rather than continuing a conversation. "I'd recommend you control your family for the remainder of this flight. Law enforcement will be at the gate when we land, and the composition of the situation report I file in the next 10 minutes will determine how that meeting goes for you." She paused. "I've been doing this job for 16 years. I know exactly how these things proceed," Loretta said quietly, with the quality of someone who has stopped trying to get through to the person they're talking to and is now simply speaking for the record. "His mother is Dr. Naomi Caldwell. She is in seat 3A. And what you just did to this child—" She stopped, shook her head. "His mother is in seat 3A. Brenda's smile was tolerant and complete. "Of course she is." 3 words, each one a wall. And then from the front of the plane, from the direction of seat 3A, from 40 feet forward and closing, a voice. "What are you doing to my son?" Not a question. The sentence had the grammatical form of a question and contained none of the uncertainty of one. It was a demand that existed beyond the need for an answer, a sentence that had already assessed the situation and arrived at the relevant facts, and was now simply requiring the person responsible to be present for what came next. Every head in the vicinity turned toward the voice. The cabin, which had been full of the murmuring aftermath of what had just happened, whispered exchanges, the creak of seatbacks as people turned, the small sounds of people processing something they had witnessed and were still deciding how to hold, went entirely silent. Naomi stood at the threshold between business class and economy, just past the privacy curtain in the center of the aisle. She had been there for 12 seconds, which had been enough. She had come forward when Devon's notification reached her corporate inbox, specifically the 3 photographs which she had looked at once and not needed to look at again, and she had walked the length of business class and the forward section of economy at a pace that was not hurrying and was not slow. The pace of someone who knows exactly where she is going and has nothing to prove to anyone about how she gets there. She was not in performance mode. This was not the COO arriving to manage an incident. This was a mother who had seen photographs of marks on her son's arm and had walked forward to be present for what came next, and the specific quality of her stillness. Both hands at her sides, her blazer, buttoned her face, carrying the particular and terrifying calm of someone who has stopped hoping this isn't what it looks like, was more authoritative than anything she could have done with her voice. Her eyes were on Brenda's hands. Specifically, she was looking at the space between Brenda's hands and Elijah, measuring the distance, calculating from the photographs what those hands had recently done. "Ma'am Brenda," said the reflexive authority kicking in immediately, "I need you to return to your seat. This is a crew matter, and it's being handled according to." Naomi walked toward her son. Not quickly, not dramatically, she simply walked, and the fact of her walking made Brenda's sentence irrelevant. the way a tree falling in a forest makes other sounds irrelevant. She reached Elijah and knelt in front of him, her movement bringing her from adult height to his level in one smooth motion, and her hands went to his face the same way Loretta's had, but also differently, with the specific texture of a mother's touch recognizable to a child in the dark in the way that certain things are simply recognizable and require no evidence. "Hey," she said quietly. "For him only. I'm here." He leaned forward and pressed his face against her shoulder, and his breath came out in the shuddering exhale of someone who has been holding themselves together for a long time and has finally found the place where they don't have to. She held him with one arm, and with her other hand she carefully, precisely pushed his sleeve up. She looked at the marks for 1 second. Then she stood up. Her eyes found Brenda's, and they stayed there. And everyone in the surrounding rows had the same experience, the experience of watching someone arrive at a decision that had already been arrived at before they entered the room, of watching a moment crystallize into the beginning of something that would not be stopped. Loretta beside Elijah watched Naomi's face and felt something shift in the air around them, the way pressure changes before weather changes. "You put your hands on my child," Naomi said. She did not say it loudly. She did not need to. Brenda's professional composure was working hard now, doing what it had been built to do, presenting a calm and authoritative face to a situation that the composure itself was still trying to assess. "Ma'am, your son was repeatedly refusing crew instructions and attempting to access restricted sections of this aircraft without—" "He was coming to find me," Naomi said. "His mother, in seat 3A. Because I told him to this morning before we boarded. I told him if he needed anything to come find me and just ask." Her voice was even and completely without effect, and this was somehow the most unsettling thing about it. There was no heat in it because it was not the temperature of anger. It was the temperature of something that had moved beyond anger into the country on the other side of it. He asked, "And you grabbed him?" "I was following protocol." "Tell me your name and employee ID number." The request was formal and direct, and it stopped Brenda mid-sentence with the clinical efficiency of a door closing. Something shifted in her expression, not quite fear, but its precursor, the recognition that the person asking the question is asking it for a specific purpose that she cannot yet fully see. Brenda Hollis. She said, her chin lifting slightly with the last available instinct of someone maintaining a position they know they are losing. "Employee 52-114. 16 years with this airline." She paused. "And you are?" Naomi didn't answer. "Not yet." "Are you aware," Naomi said, instead of answering, of company policy 4.7.3. The question was quiet and specific, and the specificity of it not a general question about rules or fairness, but a reference to a numbered policy cited with the fluency of someone who didn't need to look it up, produced the first real crack in Brenda's composure. The crack was small. It showed in the eyes. A fractional change in the quality of her focus. A barely perceptible recalibration. Like a chess player who has just noticed that the board is not in the configuration she believed it was in. "I know the policies relevant to my role," Brenda said. 4.7.3, Naomi repeated with the patience of someone who is willing to wait as long as necessary for the correct answer. "Passenger dignity and non-discrimination. Zero tolerance for profiling. Mandatory de-escalation procedures for all cabin crew in any situation involving a minor traveling alone or with family." She took one step toward Brenda, and the step was measured deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who has been preparing for this specific conversation for much longer than Brenda knows. "Let me tell you what you did, so there's no ambiguity about what's in the report." The cabin was absolutely still. The passengers who had been recording lowered their phones slightly instinctively because what was happening now had moved past the need for evidence into something that was going to play itself out fully in front of them regardless. "You physically restrained a 9-year-old child," Naomi said. "Not guided, not redirected, restrained with sufficient force to produce visible bruising that is currently documented in photographs. You used coded discriminatory language that was overheard and recorded by multiple passengers, kids like you, and wherever she belongs. And that's what they all say, language that in context is not ambiguous about what category of child you were placing my son in. You failed to de-escalate at every available opportunity, choosing instead to escalate with each exchange, and you threatened a traveling family with removal from the aircraft based on no legitimate safety grounds whatsoever. She paused. Let each item sit for a moment in the air between them. I have more, but I'll stop there for now. Brenda opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I was doing my job. He was being non-compliant, and he refused to Devon. Devon had been standing at the edge of the scene crew tablet in hand, and he stepped forward now with the quality of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment and is ready for it. He turned the tablet to face the cabin, not dramatically, just presenting it the way you present a document that contains what it contains and requires no embellishment. Documentation logged at 8:47 a.m. Devon said, his voice calm and precise. Time stamped. Photo corroborated. Already submitted to the crew management system and Captain Reyes's notification channel. He looked at Brenda steadily. I was in the aisle for most of it. The man in row 14 stood up. He was holding his phone with the screen facing outward, showing a video thumbnail. I have 47 seconds, he said. Clear audio. The woman in the window seat of row 16 held up her phone without standing. I have more. The teenager in row 17, I started recording at row 16. 3 angles, 3 devices, 3 people who had watched and had not been willing for it to disappear. Brenda looked at the phones. She looked at Devon's tablet. She looked at Naomi, and something in her face, the last structural piece of the composure, shifted and did not shift back. Naomi took out her own phone. She dialed. The call connected after 1 ring, and she said, "This is Caldwell," and the person on the other end did not speak, only listened for 45 seconds, while Naomi described in 3 sentences what had happened and what she needed. She ended the call, looked back at Brenda. Security will be at gate C14. I need the full manifest and passenger contact list before wheels down. And I need the captain. I don't have to explain myself to a passenger. Brenda said it as though she still believed it, but the sentence had the quality of something being said because it had been said before, not because it currently applied. No, Naomi said. You don't. She looked at Devon. Devon turned to Brenda. His voice was quiet and entirely without satisfaction because this was not a satisfying thing, it was a necessary thing, and those were different. Dr. Naomi Caldwell, he said, Chief Operating Officer of Skyward Airlines. He paused. She's been flying incognito today. Routine inspection. The color that left Brenda Hollis's face was not a gradual thing. It left the way the light leaves a room when someone switches off the lamp all at once, a single event, and then it was gone. Her hands, which had been perfectly still at her sides, began to shake. She pressed them together in front of her, lacing her fingers, and the lacing itself communicated something about the effort required to keep them from shaking more. She started. Yes, Naomi said. If I had known I know. Naomi's voice remained level, and the levelness of it was its own verdict. That's exactly the problem. From the cockpit, Captain Reyes emerged into the forward cabin gray at the temples, experienced enough to read a situation in the single second of assessment that pilots develop for situations that require it. He saw Elijah. He saw the grandmother. He saw the passengers with their phones. He saw Devon's tablet. He saw Brenda's face. He did not need to be told what had happened, because the scene told him completely and without ambiguity. He looked at Naomi. Recognition arrived in his expression and reconfigured it. Dr. Richardson. He stopped himself. Dr. Caldwell. I didn't know you were... I know, she said. That was the point. He turned to Devon. Give me the documentation. Devon handed him the tablet. The captain looked at it for 15 seconds, and his jaw set, and he handed it back. He turned to Brenda. There was no anger in his face. There was something quieter and more complete than anger. Ms. Hollis, did you physically restrain this child? Brenda's mouth opened. A sentence that was not a sentence came out half a justification, the beginning of an explanation, and Reyes stopped it. Yes or no? The silence was 4 seconds long. Yes, she said. Captain Reyes said Devon. Escort Ms. Hollis to the rear galley. Relieved of duty, effective now. No passenger contact for the remainder of this flight. He said it the way experienced people give difficult orders, without anger, without ceremony, with the flat finality of someone who understands that this is not the time for drama, that the thing that needed to happen cleanly, and that his job right now was to make sure it did. Brenda looked around the cabin one final time, the same inventory scan she had performed on Elijah 40 minutes ago, except that now it was desperate rather than contemptuous, sweeping from phone to face, looking for something that wasn't there. Some holdout, some passenger who might yet be persuaded to see this differently. She found none. The cabin had made its assessment, and the assessment was complete, and it was not changing. She looked at Elijah last. He was sitting in row 19 with his spacebook held against his chest, his sleeve still pushed up, the marks on his arm visible in the overhead light, and he was looking back at her with an expression that was not triumph, not anger, not even reproach, just the clear and unguarded gaze of a child who is still trying to understand what just happened to him and why. The simplicity of it. The fact that his face held no performance, no message, just a child looking, was more devastating than anything in Devon's documentation. She looked away first. Devon stepped beside her. "Ms. Hollis," he said, not unkindly. "This way." She walked. Each step measured head-angled slightly down, hands clasped in front of her, in the same laced posture that had been trying to contain her shaking since the moment Devon had said Naomi's name. She passed rows 17, 16, 15, 14, past the man who had recorded her, past the woman in the window seat, past the teenager who had started recording at row 16, and none of them said anything as she passed, because nothing needed to be said. The silence of the cabin as she moved through it was its own kind of accounting. At row 19 she passed Loretta and Elijah. Elijah did not move. He watched her pass with that same clear and unconstructed gaze, and Loretta's arm tightened slightly around his shoulder, and Brenda did not stop and did not speak and walked the rest of the way to the rear galley and disappeared behind the curtain. Devon followed. The curtain closed. Reyes turned to Naomi. There was something in his face beyond professional concern, a kind of gravity that people carry when they understand they are standing in a moment that will be significant, that will extend past its own edges and become part of something larger. Dr. Caldwell. I'm sorry. For all of it. You couldn't have known, she said. That's exactly why I fly incognito. She glanced toward where Devon and Brenda had gone, then back to him. I need medical documentation for my son, passenger witness contacts, cockpit recordings from the past 90 minutes, and I need a security hold at gate C-14 when we land. You'll have everything he said. The other flight attendant who had been working the flight, a woman named Sasha, who had been in the front galley during the incident, and had heard it, had understood what she was hearing, and had not come out, stood near the galley curtain now with her face composed into the careful blankness of someone who has not yet decided what to do with the fact of their own inaction. Naomi noticed her. Sasha met her eyes for a moment and then looked down, which was itself a kind of answer. Naomi let it be for now. It would be in the report. She knelt again in front of Elijah this time, not checking him for damage, but just being there at his level unhurried, while the aftermath of the last 20 minutes continued its motion around them. Loretta was still holding him. He was holding his book. "Are you okay, baby?" She put her hand over the marks on his arm gently, not covering them but connecting with them, acknowledging them. He leaned his head toward her for a moment. Then he looked up. "Mom," he said with the specific and penetrating directness that children have when they have decided to ask the true question, "Why did she hate me?" The question arrived in the cabin the way certain questions arrive, landing not just on the person they're asked to, but on everyone within earshot because they are the questions everyone in the room has been refusing to ask. The woman in row 16 heard it. The man in row 14 heard it. Captain Reyes, still standing at the edge of the scene, heard it. Several people who would later describe this day to other people would name this moment specifically not the video, not the reveal, but this question asked by a 9-year-old boy in a voice without rage or bitterness, just the honest bewilderment of someone trying to understand the world he is living in. Naomi took a breath. She did not look away from him. She did not offer him a reassurance that would be easy to give and false to receive. She thought for a genuine moment the way she thought about his question about black holes with the seriousness it deserved, and then she said, "She doesn't hate you." People who hate themselves look for someone else to feel small because it's easier than feeling what's actually hurting them. What she did says everything about who she is and nothing at all about who you are. You understand? He thought about it. His expression was the expression of someone processing something they are not fully ready to process but are willing to begin. He nodded slowly. "And Elijah," she said quieter now, just for him. "You said excuse me. You told the truth. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this, not 1 second of it, was your fault." He pressed his face against her shoulder for a moment. She held him. When he sat back, he opened his spacebook to Chapter 8, where the neutron star waited with its spinning light, and he began to read. The rear galley of Flight SD-447 was a narrow, functional space, stainless steel surfaces overhead. Compartments. The particular smell of plastic and recycled air and the chemical sweetness of beverage service. And it was, by the time Devon led Brenda Hollis through the curtain and took his position near the door, completely quiet in the way that spaces become quiet after something large and irreversible has happened inside them. Brenda sat on the fold-down jump seat the one crew members used during takeoff, and landing her posture collapsed slightly from its earlier geometric precision shoulders, no longer squared spine, no longer demonstrating authority. Hands in her lap still laced together, but with less conviction now, as though the lacing were happening by habit rather than by effort. She had the look of someone in the early stages of understanding the full dimensions of what they have done, not yet arrived at it completely, but beginning to feel the shape of it. Her phone lit up on the surface beside her. She looked at the screen. A text from Frank, her brother, her regional director, the person whose desk had received 19 complaints and whose signature was on 15 resolution forms with near-identical language. The text read, "Corporate is calling my office. What did you do?" She typed back, "I didn't know who she was." The response came in 40 seconds. "Doesn't matter. You grabbed a kid. You grabbed the COO's kid. I can't protect you from this one, Bren. Don't say anything until you have a lawyer." She read it twice, put the phone face down on her knee, stared at the galley wall, which was the stainless steel wall of a functional space that had nothing to say to her. Devon stood near the curtain, not unkindly, not engaging, not performing either cruelty or sympathy, just present professional, making sure the instruction was followed. He had submitted his documentation. He had escorted her here. He was now doing his job, which was this, standing in a galley on a plane at 31,000 feet and making sure a person stayed where she had been told to stay. She tried to speak twice. The first time she said his name, Devon, and he looked at her and waited, and she looked away. The second time, she said she needed him to understand something, and he said quietly, "I don't think I need to hear anything right now." Ms. Hollis, and the gentleness in it, was almost worse than if he had been contemptuous, because contempt would have been easier to push against. She picked up her phone again, looked at Frank's message. "I can't protect you from this one. 16 years of immunity. 16 years of complaints that arrived on her brother's desk and disappeared from the record like water soaking into sand. 16 years of the specific security of a person who has learned that the consequences other people face are not consequences she will face, and it had ended in the span of approximately 4 minutes at row 19 of a Skyward Airlines economy section, because she had not known that the boy's mother worked on the 14th floor. This was what she was beginning to understand. Not the things she had done, not the marks on his arm, not the look on his face when she had dragged him past his grandmother. Those things were there. But she was not in them yet, not fully, because the self-protective instinct that has kept a person from full accountability for 16 years does not simply stop working the moment accountability arrives. What she was beginning to understand was the mechanics of her situation, the practical shape of what came next. She would come to the other understanding later. It would take longer. It would hurt more. But it would come. The plane began its descent. Somewhere above them, miles of altitude, the autopilot made its adjustments, and the nose tilted fractionally toward Chicago, and the cabin pressure began its slow equalization, and in the rear galley of Flight SD447. Brenda Hollis sat with her laced hands on her knees and her phone face down, and her brother's message still glowing behind the dark screen. Devin, near the curtain, reached into his jacket pocket and checked his tablet one more time. His documentation had received a read receipt from Dr. Caldwell's corporate inbox at 8:53 a.m. He put the tablet away. Outside the small porthole window set into the galley door, clouds were thickening as the plane descended toward the lake, and Chicago was somewhere below them in the gray October morning, approaching with the certainty of things that approach, regardless of how you feel about arriving. The plane crossed the event horizon of its descent. There was no going back. Devin's documentation ran to 11 entries, time-stamped in 60-second intervals from 8:42 a.m. to 8:53 a.m. It was not written in the language of outrage or advocacy. It was written in the language of observation, the flat and accurate language of someone who had been trained to document and who understood that the value of documentation is precisely its refusal to editorialize, because editorialized documents get challenged and plain ones don't. 8:42 a.m. Hollis B. Employee, 52-114 positioned cart diagonally across economy aisle rows 15 to 16 blocking full passage. Minor passenger male approximately. 9 years attempted to pass. Polite verbal request observed. Cart not moved. 8:44 a.m. Hollis applied right-hand grip to miner's left shoulder. Pressure assessed as above guidance level for passenger redirection. 8:45 a.m. Hollis applied bilateral grip to miner's upper right arm. Both hands. Miner did not resist physically. Miner verbally requested release. Release not given. 8:46 a.m. Miner dragged backward from row 16 to row 19. Duration approximately 90 seconds. Miner's feet audibly dragging on carpet. Miner's personal item book dislodged from backpack at row 17. Miner verbally expressed pain. Release not initiated. 8:47 a.m. Miner released at row 19 seat. Bruising pattern consistent with bilateral grip visible on miner's right arm. 5 distinct pressure marks. Photographed. 8:48 a.m. Hollis initiated crew radio incident report, citing FAA violation by miner. Language used, disruptive, non-compliant, restricted area access. No safety event preceded these classifications. Minor had requested permission to visit parent in business class. 8:49 a.m. Documentation submitted to crew management system, Captain Rhea's notification channel, and Dr. Caldwell's corporate inbox. Photographic evidence appended. The specificity of the numbers 11 entries, 90 seconds, 11 rows, 5 marks, did what Devon had intended them to do. They made the event concrete. They placed it in time and space with the precision of something that was now a matter of record rather than a matter of competing accounts. The incident was no longer something that had happened in the middle of a flight that could be resolved with a form letter and a bonus miles offer and Frank Hollis's signature. It was something that existed in the crew management system, in the captain's notification log, in the COO's corporate inbox, and within 4 minutes of Devon hitting send in the phones of 3 passengers who were still recording when Naomi arrived and whose footage would cross 11 million views before Devon's crew shift ended. In seat 3, Naomi had read Devon's documentation in full twice, with the controlled steadiness of someone who has been building toward a specific outcome for 3 months and has just watched the final piece arrive. She forwarded the full packet to CEO Richard Okafor, the 11 entries, the photographs, the complaint history, and a 3-sentence cover note that read, SD447 in progress, documentation complete, will call before wheels down. Then she closed the tablet and looked out the window at the descent at Chicago's flat geometry spreading toward the lake, and she thought about the specific file she had pulled 3 months ago. Complaint number 7 4 years back, a black nurse who had asked to use the business class bathroom and been told by Brenda Hollis that those facilities were for premium passengers. The nurse had filed a 4-paragraph complaint. Frank had closed it in 36 hours. The resolution note said passenger misunderstood crew instruction regarding lavatory availability. 4 paragraphs. 36 hours. 3,000 bonus miles. And complaint number 12, the 14-year-old boy whose father had been made to empty his son's bag in the aisle in front of the whole cabin because Brenda had accused him of stealing headphones that were sitting in the seat pocket. The father had written, "My son hasn't wanted to fly since. He's 14 years old, and he already believes the world thinks he's a criminal." Frank had flagged that one as incident de-escalated at crew level and closed it in 48 hours. Naomi thought about the 14-year-old. She thought about whether he was 19 now or 20, and whether he still believed what his father had written, and whether she could find him. She picked up her phone, called Okafor. He answered on the first ring. She told him everything. He listened without interrupting the documentation, the photographs, the bruising Elijah's question, Devon's tablet, the 3 phones. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. The sound of someone who has been COO long enough to understand exactly what the next 72 hours were going to require. "Send me everything before wheels down," he said. And Naomi, a brief pause. "How is he scared?" she said. "Hurt." Asking the questions no 9-year-old should have to ask. "We're going to fix this," he said. "All of it." She looked out the window. The lake was visible now, enormous and silver-gray, the city arranged at its edge like something that had grown there naturally. "I know," she said. "Start with Frank Hollis." Naomi went to the rear galley herself, not because it was tactically necessary. Devon was there, the situation was contained, the plane was 20 minutes from landing, but because there were 19 complaints in a file, and she had been the first one, and she understood in a way that went deeper than policy that this was not something she could have Devon do for her. She pulled back the curtain. Devon stepped aside, giving her the space, and stood near the door with the quiet attentiveness of someone who understood that what was about to happen in this galley was a different kind of reckoning than the one that had just happened in the cabin. Brenda looked up when Naomi entered. Her face was red and blotchy in the way of someone who has been crying without fully committing to crying, trying to hold it back and not quite succeeding. She straightened slightly as Naomi came in, the automatic reflex of her spine reasserting itself. even now and then seemed to remember that straightening didn't mean anything anymore, and stopped. Naomi stood. She did not sit. She looked at Brenda for a moment with an expression that Brenda could not fully read. It was not contemptuous, not triumphant, not cold. It was something closer to the expression of someone standing in front of a thing they have been preparing to face for a long time, and finding that the preparation and the reality are different in ways they couldn't have anticipated. She opened her tablet. She pulled up the file. Complaint 7, she said. Not, I'm going to read you your file, or I want you to hear something, just the number stated as a beginning. 4 years ago. A nurse. She was traveling alone, connecting through Atlanta. She asked to use the business class restroom because the economy line was long and she'd been managing a full bladder for 40 minutes. You told her those facilities were for premium passengers. She filed 4 paragraphs. Your brother closed it in 36 hours. Naomi paused. Her name was Diane. Brenda said nothing. Her hands were in her lap. Complaint 12. Naomi's voice was even, carrying no heat, moving through the entries the way someone moves through a record they are determined to read completely. 3 years ago, a father and his 14-year-old son. You accused the boy of stealing headphones from the seat pocket. You made his father empty his son's bag in the aisle in front of 40 passengers. The headphones were in the seat pocket. The father wrote that his son stopped wanting to fly after that. Your brother closed it in 48 hours. She looked up. The boy was 14. Brenda's lips pressed together. A muscle moved along her jaw. Complaint 16. Naomi continued. 2 years ago, a woman in her 70s. The only black passenger in first class on that flight. You moved her to economy citing a seat configuration error. No other seat was moved. Her original seat was given to a white passenger who arrived 40 minutes late. She filed 3 paragraphs. Your brother closed it in 24 hours, his fastest one. A brief pause. She was 73 years old. The galley was entirely quiet. Devon stood near the door. The engines were a low constant beneath everything. I'm not... Brenda started. I wasn't trying to. I know what you were doing, Naomi said, not cutting her off, but simply stating it the way you state a thing that is true. You were doing what you'd always done because you'd always been allowed to do it. Because a complaint meant your brother's desk, and your brother's desk meant a form letter, and a form letter meant it disappeared. You knew how the machinery worked. You'd been relying on it for 16 years. Brenda's face crumpled slightly at machinery at hearing it named as something built rather than something that had simply happened to her benefit. But here's what I need you to understand, Naomi said, and she took one step closer to the jump seat, closing the distance between them without aggression, just with the directness of someone who needs to be close enough to be sure they are heard. Every one of those 19 complaints was a real person. Every one of them experienced something real, and they wrote it down, and they believed that writing it down would mean something. And what happened instead was that their words went into a drawer, and the drawer was locked. And now you're sitting here telling me you didn't know who I was, and that's true, and it's also exactly the wrong answer. Because it means if I had been anyone else, if Elijah's mother had been a woman with no power, with no title, with nowhere to send a complaint that couldn't be closed by her brother, you would have walked back to the front of the plane and filed your incident report and boarded your next flight and done it again. Brenda was crying now, fully and without the pretense of containing it, and the tears were real. Naomi was certain of that. Watching her face, reading the specificity of the grief in it, but what the tears were for, Naomi understood was still primarily the situation rather than the people in it. That would change. It would take time and would not be comfortable. But it would change. I didn't know, Brenda said quietly, and this time she did not mean I didn't know who you were. She meant something broader and less formed and more honest. something that was the beginning of an understanding she had spent 16 years avoiding. "I know you didn't," Naomi said. "That's what I mean." She closed the tablet, stood quietly for a moment in the narrow galley. 7 years ago, she said, and her voice changed slightly, not softening exactly, but acquiring a texture it hadn't had before, the texture of something personal breaking through the professional Boston to Miami. A black woman in business class, early 30s, traveling alone. She was going home from a conference. You spilled coffee on her, and when she asked for napkins, you told her she was being uppity. You told her maybe she'd be more comfortable in a section better suited to her. Brenda's face had gone still. She filed a complaint, Naomi said. Complaint number 1. Your brother offered her 3,000 miles to drop it. She took them. She let a moment pass. That was me. The silence in the galley was absolute. I don't. Brenda's voice was barely audible. I don't remember that. I know, Naomi said, and there was something in the way she said it, not as an accusation, but as the saddest possible version of the truth that made it land more completely than anger could have. It was nothing to you. It was just another day. You went home and had dinner and forgot about it. She looked at Brenda steadily. I went home and filed a complaint that your brother closed in 36 hours. And I told myself that when I had the power to change things, I would. And I kept climbing. And I kept waiting. And today you gave me the thing I needed that your brother couldn't close. She turned to Devon. Stay with her. She pulled back the curtain. The cabin was 30 rows long and gray with October light, and her son was in row 19 reading about neutron stars, and the plane was 12 minutes from landing. The announcement came with the particular tone that flight announcements always carry, at the moment they are most necessary. A voice designed to be calm, carrying the weight of a situation that is anything but. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Chicago O'Hare. Please ensure your seat backs and tray tables are in their full, upright, and locked positions. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. The cabin moved through its rituals. Tray tables folded, seat backs straightened. Overhead compartments that had been opened were reclosed. The small adjustments of people organizing themselves toward landing, toward the resumption of their lives, toward the airport, and the baggage claim, and the car rental, and the hotel, and whatever had been waiting for them at the other end of this flight that had become a different kind of flight than they had expected to be on. In row 19, Elijah was reading. He had arrived at the part of the neutron star chapter where the book described how a pulsar, a rapidly rotating neutron star, sent its beam of radiation sweeping through the universe with such regularity that when astronomers first detected it in 1967, they thought for a brief and remarkable period that it was a signal from another civilization, because nothing natural was supposed to be that precise, that rhythmic, that reliable. They had called it LGM-1 for Little Green Men, until they understood what it actually was. He found this extraordinarily interesting, the idea that something natural could be mistaken for intelligence because of its consistency, its refusal to vary from its own pattern. He dog-eared the page. Loretta had her arm around him, and he was leaning into her shoulder without performing the leaning, just doing it the way bodies know which direction is warmth. She was not sleeping now. She had not slept since she woke up at row 18 and found what she found, and she would not sleep again until they were off this plane and Elijah was somewhere that felt like home. Her hand moved slowly on his arm, the unmarked arm, in the small repetitive motion that grandmothers make when they are trying to give comfort and also receive it. The man in row 14 was looking at his phone at the 47 seconds of video he had not yet posted. He had given his contact information to Captain Reyes 20 minutes ago. He had watched Brenda Hollis walk the length of the cabin with Devon at her back. He had watched Naomi kneel in front of her son. He had heard the question, Mom. Why did she hate me? And had felt it land somewhere specific, somewhere that connected to his own son, who was 11, who had been told to move from a seat he was sitting in once in a waiting room of a government office by a woman who had looked at him the way Brenda had looked at Elijah. He had not had Naomi's authority. He had not been able to do what Naomi had done. He looked at the video on his phone. He thought about what it would mean to put it somewhere where it couldn't be closed by a Frank Hollis, where it would exist in a form that couldn't be resolved with bonus miles. He thought about the nurse, though he didn't know about the nurse. He thought about the 14-year-old boy, though he didn't know about him either. He thought about his own son. He typed a caption. "This happened on my flight today. The boy's name is Elijah." He held his thumb over the post button for 3 seconds. Then he pressed it. Then he put his phone in his jacket pocket and looked out the window at Chicago arriving below them. Naomi was on the phone with Okafor, speaking quietly, efficiently, completing the preparation for what would happen at Gate C-14. She had everything she needed. Devon's documentation, the photographs, the complaint file, the cockpit recording, authorization, the corporate notification already sent and acknowledged. She had 3 passengers ready to give witness statements. She had a COO's authority and 18 years of climbing to it and the marks on her son's arm. The wheels touched the tarmac with a squeal and a shudder. The engines reversed. The runway unfurled in the gray morning outside the oval windows. Chicago came up around them, vast and flat and indifferent, and Flight SD-447 slowed toward Gate C-14, with the particular finality of something arriving exactly where it was always going to arrive. Through the windows, as they taxied, Naomi counted 3 airport security officers, 2 skyward supervisors in company jackets, SVP Kathleen Park in a gray coat, and beyond the glass wall of the gate, news cameras already set up, already lit with the practiced readiness of crews who had been tipped off in time to organize. The word had traveled in the way that words travel now through texts and DMs and the networks of people who monitor such things, and it had traveled fast enough that by the time Flight SD-447 reached Gate C-14, the story existed in a form larger than the flight. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Captain Reyes's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have personnel who need to deplane first. We appreciate your patience and your cooperation today, more than I can properly say from this intercom." The door opened. 2 officers boarded. Kathleen Park came directly to seat 3A, and the look on her face when she saw Naomi was the look of someone who has been briefed and briefed again and still finds the reality of the thing harder than the briefing. Dr. Caldwell. She glanced at Elijah, who was watching her with calm curiosity. Richard called from the car. "He wanted me here personally." "Thank you for coming," Naomi said. Kathleen crouched slightly, bringing herself to Elijah's level, and her voice changed the way voices change when adults are trying to meet children where they are, and mean it rather than performing it. "Hi. My name's Kathleen. I work with your mom." She looked at his book. "What are you reading?" He showed her the cover. "Black holes," she said. "Are they interesting?" "Really interesting," he said with the unhesitating certainty of someone for whom this was simply true. "Did you know that time slows down near 1? I did not know that, Kathleen said with the same genuine quality that Devon had used that morning over the juice cart, and Elijah accepted it with the small satisfied nod of a person whose favorite facts are being properly received. The 2 officers moved through economy to the rear galley. Devon emerged first, stepped aside, and Brenda came through the galley curtain and into the main cabin with her head angled slightly down and her hands at her sides, walking the full length of Flight SD-447 for the last time. The passengers watched, phones lifted. Devon walked behind her, not pressing, just present. She passed row 19. Elijah was looking at her, and for the second time their eyes met, brief and unplanned. A collision of 2 people who had occupied the same space and the same moment, in a way that neither of them would ever fully leave behind. Brenda looked away, kept walking. The cabin door closed behind her, and the sound of the news cameras and the security conversation and the gate noise was briefly audible before the door sealed again. In a private room off Gate C-14, a paramedic named Sarah was waiting. She was young and professionally calm, and she examined Elijah's arm with a gentleness and a thoroughness that treated his comfort and the evidentiary integrity of the documentation as equally important. She took photographs, clear, well-lit, precisely composed. 5 distinct pressure marks, fully developed, now laid out in the unmistakable pattern of a hand. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart," she said. "These will be gone in a week or so." She looked up at Naomi. "I'm documenting this as evidence of assault. Report goes to airport police and to your legal team." Elijah looked at the camera flash with the thoughtful expression of a child who is processing many things simultaneously. He reached into his hoodie pocket and found the rocket sticker the paramedic had given him, a small cartoon rocket on a yellow background. He held it without sticking it anywhere. Just held it in his palm, feeling its edges while Sarah finished her work. "Mom," he said quietly while Sarah was writing her notes. "Yeah, baby. I want to go home." "I know," she said. "We're going. We're going right now." The man from row 14, his name was James Osei, though the internet would not know that for several hours, posted his 47 seconds of video at 10:23 a.m. Chicago time while he was still in the terminal, standing near the baggage claim with his rolling suitcase beside him and his phone in both hands. The caption was 8 words. "This happened on my flight today. The boy's name is Elijah." By noon, it had been viewed 2 million times. The video was unsteady in the way that phone footage taken in the aisle of a plane in a moment of shock is always slightly unsteady, but clear. Clear enough to see the grip, to see the way Elijah's sneakers moved against the carpet, to hear the squeak-drag-squeak of rubber on aircraft textile, to hear his voice saying, "I didn't do anything wrong," in the quiet tone that carried further and lasted longer than anything louder would have. It ended with Brenda's voice carrying "Kids like you need to learn" as Elijah disappeared behind the curtain of the privacy divide. 47 seconds, 11 rows, 1 sentence from a 9-year-old. By 2 p.m., the woman from row 16 had posted her footage. By 3 p.m., the teenager from row 17 had posted his. 6 different passenger clips existed by evening, and the collective effect of them, 6 angles continuous coverage from the moment Brenda's second hand joined the first to the moment she walked off the plane, was the effect of complete documentation, the effect of an event that existed from every direction simultaneously and could not be entered from any angle without encountering a version of the truth. The internet noticed the spacebook. This was the detail among all the details available that broke something open in people. Not the grip, not the uniform, not the language, though all of those were in the comments and in the threads and in the posts that were being written faster than any individual could track. But the spacebook, the way Elijah had said "my book" when it fell, the way Devin had smoothed the pages and brought it back to him, the way Elijah had held it against his chest through the reveal scene, a library copy with a cracked spine and a crooked rocket patch on the bag. It came out of, this was the detail that people couldn't stop writing about. He said, "My book." He's worried about his book. He's 9 years old and he's being dragged down an aisle and he says, "My book," the way he held it, like it was the one thing he could protect. Imagine being a child and that being the thing you reach for. The hashtag Elijah's Book began trending in the United States at 4:17 p.m. By midnight, it was trending in 14 countries. Someone in Seoul posted a photo of a child's well-loved library book with the caption translated as "For every child who just wants to read." Someone in Lagos posted a photo of a child's worn sneakers. Someone in London posted a photo of a small iron-on rocket patch. The 6 recording passengers from SD447 found each other in a Twitter thread by evening, none of them having planned to each of them having posted their individual clip with similar captions, all of them responding to the same question from a journalist who had found all 6 of them within 4 hours. What made you decide to record? Their answers were different in their specifics and identical in their essence. One of them wrote, "Because I have kids. Because I knew if I didn't, there would be no record. Because I didn't want it to disappear." Frank Hollis's name surfaced by early afternoon, connected to Brenda's through a legal journalist who had found the Skyward Regional Directory, noted the last names, and spent 40 minutes on public employment records before posting a thread with the title "On Flight SD 447. The lead attendant's complaints were handled by her brother. Here's what 19 complaints look like when a family member has the authority to close them. The thread was read 800,000 times before the evening news. By midnight, James Osie's original post had been viewed 11 million times. He was sitting in a hotel room in Chicago when his phone showed him the number, and he sat with it for a while, the phone in his hand and the number on the screen, thinking about his 11-year-old son and the waiting room and the woman who had told him to move. He thought about the 47 seconds that he had held in his phone, and the 3 seconds he had held his thumb over the post button. He thought about what it would have meant to press nothing. He turned off the phone. He would not sleep well, but he would sleep, and in the morning he would give his formal witness statement to Skyward's Ethics Board and to the state prosecutor's office, and 6 months after that he would sit in a courtroom in Cook County and tell a jury what he had seen, with the directness and precision of someone who had spent 6 months making sure he remembered every detail correctly. In his hotel room, the phone was dark. The post was out in the world, doing what it was doing beyond his ability to manage or moderate. He had done what he could. He had made sure the record existed. He turned off the lamp. CEO Richard Okafor held a press conference at 3 p.m. the following day, 41 hours after flight. SD 447 landed at Gate C, 14. He stood at the podium alone. No communications team flanking him, no prepared statement in his hands, no corporate lawyer at the edge of the frame. He had decided in the conversation with Naomi on the landing approach that the situation required the kind of response that corporate language was not equipped to provide, and he had spent the intervening 41 hours making sure he was ready to provide the other kind. "We failed," he said, "not procedurally, not operationally, morally. We had 19 opportunities to see a pattern, address it, and protect the people it was hurting. We had a system in place to review complaints, and that system was corrupted by a relationship that should never have been permitted to exist, and we looked away from both the pattern and the corruption for 16 years. That is a failure of leadership at every level, including mine, and it ends today." He announced the terminations one by one, stating each name and the reason clearly without hedging. Brenda Hollis terminated for cause. Effective the previous morning from the moment Captain Reyes had said relieved of duty, effective now, but confirmed in writing with full documentation through every channel that confirmation required. Frank Hollis removed from his regional director position pending criminal investigation. His entire 6-year caseload of complaint resolutions, suspended all 19 Brenda Hollis cases transferred to an external ethics board chaired by a retired federal judge. His corporate access email and security credentials revoked as of 9 a.m., 4 additional managers who had co-signed or approved complaint resolutions in Brenda's file placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Their names not given at the press conference but given to the Ethics Board and to the State Prosecutor's Office. Devin Marsh promoted. Not announced at the press conference, Okafor had made this call personally the night before via a direct email to Devin that said simply, "Your documentation was exemplary. Your judgment was right. Your new title is In-Flight Services Supervisor effective Monday. Thank you." Devin had read the email on his phone while sitting at his kitchen table at 11 p.m. and had called his mother, and his mother had cried. The other attendant, Sasha, who had been in the forward galley and had heard everything and had not come out a formal written warning and mandatory retraining program with a performance review in 90 days, The report made clear in language that Naomi had drafted herself, and Okafor had not changed that inaction in the presence of harm is a form of participation that the institutional infrastructure that allowed harm to persist was built partly from the accumulated weight of people who had seen and had not spoken, and that going forward the airline's standards would reflect that understanding, rather than quietly accommodating the absence of it. The announcement of a complete review of all complaints closed by Frank Hollis over 6 years, 340 complaints. External Ethics Board each one re-examined in full. Every complainant who could be located contacted directly. At the press conference, a journalist asked, "Is this about liability management, or is it genuine accountability?" Okafor looked at the journalist for a moment before answering, and the pause was not theatrical. It was the pause of someone deciding how honest to be, and deciding to be all the way honest. "Both," he said. "Both. It would be dishonest to say liability isn't part of it. But I have a son. He's 7. And when I watched that video, when I listened to that boy's voice, I thought about what it would mean to look my son in the eye and explain that we had 19 complaints and a corrupted review process, and we let it continue. I couldn't construct a version of that explanation that I was willing to live with." He looked at the cameras. "So the answer is both, and I hope the actions matter more than the answer." The press conference was covered by every major network. Skyward's stock dropped 4.2% in the following trading session. 7 corporate advertisers called to inquire about pausing partnerships. Okafor took all 7 calls personally and told each of them the same thing. "We failed. We're fixing it. The fixing is more important than the partnership, and if you disagree, I understand." 3 of the 7 stayed. 4 paused. Within 3 months, all 4 resumed because the fixing turned out to be genuine. And genuine things are recognized eventually by people who are paying attention. The Ethics Board's outreach began within 72 hours of Okafor's press conference, working through Frank Hollis's 340 closed complaints with the thoroughness that comes from a retired federal judge who has spent a career understanding that procedural shortcuts have costs that are paid by specific people with specific faces. Within the first week, 11 of the 19 original Brenda Hollis complainants had been located and contacted. Not all of them wanted to be found. 2 did not respond. 3 responded and declined to participate further, which was their right and which the board respected entirely. But 6 came forward, and the 6 of them, in their 6 separate conversations with the board's investigators, told a story that was not 6 stories at all, but one story told in 6 voices. "Diane, the nurse complaint 4 years ago, I want you to understand what it cost me to file that complaint. I spent 3 hours writing it, 4 paragraphs. I was careful about my language because I knew I already knew that if I seemed angry, it would be characterized as anger rather than testimony. I tried to just describe what happened exactly without emotion, and what I got back was a form letter and 3,000 miles and a sentence about how I had misunderstood the crew instruction. I didn't misunderstand anything. I knew what she meant. I just couldn't prove I knew, so I accepted the miles and told myself at least I'd filed, at least there would be a record somewhere. And then I found out there wasn't a record. There was just her brother's desk." She paused during her recorded statement. "I want people to understand that the filing was an act of hope, and what happened to the filing was an answer to that hope. And that answer told me something about what this system thought I was worth, and I carried that answer around for 4 years. The father of the 14-year-old from complaint 12. My son's name is Andre. He's 17 now. I showed him the video with his permission. I asked him first, and he watched it without saying anything. And when it was done, he said, 'Dad.' I didn't know that it happened to other people. And I said, 'It's happened to a lot of people.' And he said, 'Did anyone do anything about it?' And I said, 'Not then. Now.'" He stopped for a moment. He started flying again last month. First time in 3 years. He was nervous. but he went. The woman from complaint, 1675 years old, now 2 years on from the seat she'd been moved from, gave her statement in a single long paragraph that the investigator later described as the most precisely articulated account of the experience of public humiliation she had received in 30 years of practice. I want you to understand that she moved me in front of everyone. She made an announcement of it. The announcement wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, because the point wasn't just that I should move. The point was that everyone should see me move, should understand that whatever I had believed about my right to be there was incorrect, and that she had the authority to correct me publicly. That's what I need you to put in your record. Not just that she moved me, that she performed the moving, that she wanted it witnessed. Naomi issued one public statement written in her own voice, released through Skyward's communications channels and simultaneously on her own accounts. What happened to my son happens to black families every day. Usually without cameras. Usually without witnesses who decide to record. Usually without parents who have the institutional power to demand accountability that can't be closed at a brother's desk. The 19 complaints in that file are not a list of incidents. They are 19 people who did exactly what they were supposed to do. They reported, they documented, they used the system. They were told existed to protect them. The system failed them. That failure had a name and a desk and a relationship, but it also had a silence around it that was larger than one person, and that silence is what I've been working to break for 3 months, and that silence is what I'm asking all of us. Everyone who saw something and said nothing, everyone who looked away, because speaking up felt like too much to examine in ourselves. The statement was read into the congressional record 6 days later by a congresswoman from Illinois who had watched the video 12 times and had called Okafor at home. The criminal charges against Frank Hollis were filed on a Friday morning, 17 days after flight SD-447 landed at Gate C-14 in a brief and unspectacular proceeding that was attended by 2 reporters and a legal blogger, and that looked nothing like the end of 16 years of institutional protection for a specific kind of harm, but was in fact exactly that. The charge is fraud in the execution of a supervisory role, obstruction of a complaint investigation process, misuse of supervisory authority to protect a family member at the expense of the parties the complaint process was designed to protect. The evidence was Frank's own email archive, subpoenaed and reviewed by the External Ethics Board, and turned over to the state prosecutor's office in its entirety. 11 of the emails were unambiguous. Bury this one, she's having a rough year. Close it fast. The passenger's got a lawyer, but she'll drop it if you offer miles. I need this one resolved by Friday. Use the standard language. 340 complaints. 15 years of standard language applied with the confidence of a person who has never seen the machinery fail. His lawyer's initial statement cited stress, excessive caseload, and the difficult position of supervising a family member in the same organization. The prosecutor's response was to read 11 emails into the record consecutively without commentary. The press reported this the following day with the particular precision that reporters use when the facts have rendered commentary redundant. Brenda's criminal charges, assault and battery of a minor child endangerment civil rights violation, were filed the same week. Her lawyer's defense centered on the argument that she had not known who Elijah's mother was, that her actions had been taken in the context of a genuine crew safety concern, and that the video, while disturbing in appearance, did not reflect the full context of the interaction. The prosecutor played the video, the full 47 seconds. The jury deliberated for slightly under 2 hours. The verdict guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a woman with 30 years on the bench who had watched the video in chambers the night before and had made no notes because no notes were necessary, sentenced Brenda Hollis to county jail time served and probation, 500 hours of community service with a children's advocacy organization, mandatory counseling, and a permanent revocation of her aviation certification. She would never work in aviation again in any capacity that required a federal certification. Frank Hollis received 14 months federal restitution to complainants and a permanent bar from supervisory roles in any regulated industry. Outside the courthouse, Naomi gave a brief statement to the cameras and to the people holding signs who had been there since the morning, to the 11 people who came forward. You told the truth from the beginning. Your pain was real. Your complaints were not nothing. You were never nothing. She said nothing else. She walked to her car. 3 days after flight, SD-447, Elijah Caldwell was in his bedroom in Atlanta in the specific comfort of his own space. The familiar ceiling, the particular quality of afternoon light through his window. The smell of the house that was simply the smell of home, which people only notice when they have been away from it and returned. He was on his bed with his pillow behind him, and his spacebook open on his knees, and his spiral notebook beside him, and he was rereading the book from chapter 1, because he had decided sometime between the galley and the paramedics' room and the drive home that he wanted to start it over and read it again with everything he now knew. His therapist, Dr. Anita Webb, had been to the house twice in the past 3 days. She was a woman in her 50s with the specific patience of someone who has spent a career understanding that children process things at their own speed, and that the job of the adult is not to direct that processing, but to keep the space safe while it happens. She and Elijah had talked about some things and not talked about other things, and both the talking and the not talking had been in their different ways useful. His grandmother was downstairs. He could hear her in the kitchen, the sound of pots, the specific rhythm of Loretta cooking, which was one of the most reassuring sounds in Elijah's world. She had stayed for the 3 days, sleeping in the guest room, making food that no one had asked for, but that everyone needed. Naomi came in around 4 in the afternoon. The way she came home when she had been able to leave the office at a human hour, quietly not announcing herself, appearing in the doorway with the low-key presence of a parent who does not want to interrupt, but wants to be available. Elijah looked up. She sat on the edge of his bed. They were quiet together for a moment. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. Mom, Elijah said, looking at his book, not looking at her, which was how he often began questions that he had been thinking about for a while. If a star collapses into a neutron star, does it hurt? Like, does the star feel it? Naomi looked at him. She considered the question with the genuine consideration it deserved, which was the thing he trusted most about asking her things, that she took the question at its word rather than looking for the question beneath the question. I don't think it hurts, she said after a moment. I think it just becomes something different, something smaller and denser, something that has more gravity than it had before. She paused. The light it makes after the pulsar beam, the thing that spins and spins, is actually more powerful than anything it was doing when it was a regular star. It just looks different from the outside. He thought about this for a while, long enough that the dog outside finished barking and the neighborhood went quiet again. Is Brenda going to jail? He asked. There's going to be a trial, Naomi said. People will decide. Will they believe us? They have the video. He was quiet again. Then, but even without the video, would they believe us? The question was the question, the one underneath the question, the one she had been waiting for him to be ready to ask, and she didn't avoid it. She sat with it for a moment, because it deserved a moment. That's why Devin wrote it down, she said. That's why the people on the plane recorded. That's why I've spent 18 years building the authority I used yesterday. Because we can't always depend on being believed, so we build the record. We make the record so strong that belief becomes irrelevant. She put her hand over his. You understand? He nodded with the expression of someone filing something away rather than accepting something on faith. Then he reached into his hoodie pocket. He had worn the same hoodie for 3 days. Naomi had stopped trying to get him to change it and found the rocket sticker. He looked at it for a moment, the small cartoon rocket on its yellow background, its thin paper backing still attached. He peeled the backing off with his thumbnail, pressing the fold flat, the same way he pressed the dog ears of his book, making it sharp and permanent. He pressed the sticker carefully onto the front cover of the space book, centering it below the title, smoothing it flat with his palm. Then he opened to Chapter 1 and began to read. Her office on the 14th floor of Skyward's Atlanta headquarters had a window that looked east toward the airport, and on clear mornings she could see the planes on final approach, small and silver, descending in their precise ordered intervals, each one carrying the weight of its particular cargo of people and their particular reasons for being somewhere other than where they had started. She had looked at those planes from this window for 3 years, and had thought many things about them, and what she thought now was different, in a way she was still in the process of understanding. The 19 complaint files were physical. Now she had had them printed, each one in its own manila folder, and they were stacked on her desk in chronological order, oldest to newest. Complaint 1 at the bottom. The stack was not particularly tall, which was the most terrible thing about it. 19 complaints. The accumulated record of 19 people's specific and particular harm. And the stack was not particularly tall because 19 was actually not very many pieces of paper. She was going through them one at a time from the bottom up, reading each one in full for the first time in its complete form. Not skimming, not extracting the relevant details for the case. She had done that already. The case was already built. The lawyers had everything they needed, and the ethics board had everything it needed. But reading them as documents, as the records, they were the records of people who had written things down, because they believed that writing things down mattered, and because they had no other available form of resistance. Complaint 3, a black man in his 30s traveling for his mother's 70th birthday. She told me my upgrade must have been a computer error. I showed her the confirmation. She said upgrades from economy to business are frequently reversed on full flights. The flight was not full. I counted 11 empty seats. I counted them twice. She read that one twice. Complaint 9, a black woman with 2 young children trying to get a second cup of water on a 4-hour flight. She brought water to the 3 passengers across the aisle from me multiple times without being asked. I asked 3 times. The 4th time I asked, she told me the beverage service was complete and I should have gotten enough water when it was offered. My daughter was crying from thirst. She set that one face down on the desk, allowed herself 30 seconds, then picked up the next one. Her assistant called at 3 to say the congressional subcommittee had confirmed her testimony date 3 weeks out. She said yes before the sentence was finished. She had been preparing for that testimony in a different form for a long time, 18 years, in the way that everything you carry becomes preparation for the moment you're asked to put it down. She called Devin. He answered on the 2nd ring. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "What you did on that plane, the documentation, the timing, the way you handled it, that's the record we built the case on. You need to know that. I just did what the situation called for," he said, which was exactly the kind of thing Devin would say. "I know," she said. "That's why I promoted you. Because the situation called for it, and you knew it called for it, and you did it anyway without knowing how it was going to land. That's the harder version." She paused. "How are you?" "Good," he said. "Honestly good. Weird, but good." "Weird is about right," she said. "Welcome to it." She went back to the files after the call. Folder 7. Diane, the nurse. She read all 4 paragraphs in full, slowly including the last one, which she had not read before because the relevant complaint details had been in the first 3, and she had moved on. "I'm writing this because I was taught that if something is wrong, you say so. My mother taught me that. My grandmother taught her. I'm writing this because I want there to be a record that I said so. Even if nothing comes of it. Even if it just goes into a file. I was here and this happened and I am saying so." Naomi set the folder face down on the desk. She looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called Diane. The trial took 4 days. The jury received the case on a Thursday afternoon and returned their verdict on Friday morning, 68 minutes after beginning deliberations, a span of time that the lead prosecutor, a woman named Angela Rivera with 30 years in civil rights litigation, would later describe as the fastest return she had seen in a case of this complexity, and that she attributed simply to the clarity of the evidence and the honesty of the people who had come forward to testify to it. The verdict guilty on all counts: assault and battery of a minor, child endangerment, federal civil rights violation. Brenda Hollis sat in the defendant's chair when the verdict was read, and the thing that happened to her face was not dramatic. It was the face of someone arriving at a place they had known was coming for a long time, a destination they had been traveling toward since row 19 of Flight SD447 and had simply not been able to stop moving toward. Her lawyer touched her arm. She did not lean into the touch. Sentencing came 2 weeks later in a courtroom that was quieter than the trial had been, the cameras outside, the supporters in the gallery, but the room itself carrying the particular stillness of a proceeding that has already been decided and is now moving through its final form. The judge looked at Brenda for a long moment before speaking. "Ms. Hollis, you had 16 years to change course. You had 19 complaints, each one of them an opportunity to understand the harm you were causing and to stop. You chose instead to rely on a protection that no longer exists. This court sentences you to county time served and probation 500 hours of community service with a children's advocacy organization, mandatory counseling, and a permanent revocation of your aviation certification." Brenda was led out. The cameras caught her in the corridor. Outside on the courthouse steps, Naomi looked into the cameras for a moment, not at them, into them, at whoever was on the other side of them, at the 11 million people who had watched a 47-second video and had decided it mattered, and she said, "To the 11 people who came forward, you told the truth from the beginning. Your pain was real. Your complaints were not nothing." She paused. "You were never nothing." She did not elaborate. She did not take questions. She walked to her car and the doors closed and the city moved past the windows as she drove, and she thought about Diane's last paragraph, "I was here, and this happened and I am saying so," and she thought about the 47 seconds on James O.C.'s phone, and she thought about Devon's 11 time-stamped entries, and she thought about Elijah pressing his rocket sticker onto the cover of his book with his thumbnail making it sharp and permanent. She thought a record made permanent so the truth doesn't have to depend on being believed. She drove home. The same gate, the same terminal. The same low, wide quality of October morning light coming through the high windows of Gate B-12 Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. 6 months and 4 days after the morning that had begun with a boy reading about black holes and ended with a paramedic photographing 5 finger marks on his arm. Elijah was wearing different sneakers. The navy ones, with the hole at the left toe, had finally been retired in December, replaced by a dark green pair with white soles that Loretta had bought him for his birthday. His backpack was the same olive canvas, the rocket patch still slightly crooked. His spacebook was inside it, its cover bearing the rocket sticker pressed flat and permanent reading slightly more worn at its edges from 6 months of being carried and opened and closed and carried again. Naomi was beside him this time, not 40 feet forward in a separate cabin not available only by the act of a child walking through something in order to find her, but beside him, her hand available if he wanted it, her presence simply there. The gate agent smiled. "Good morning, Dr. Caldwell." "Good morning, Elijah." She checked their passes with the ease of someone for whom this was a routine act rather than a judgment, and handed them back without looking twice and said, "We're honored to have you flying with us today," and meant it. The new crew wore body cameras, small, unobtrusive, clipped to the front of their uniform jackets. It had been a policy change implemented in the first 30 days after Okafor's press conference, piloted at first on 15 routes, then expanded to the full fleet by February, the camera's presence now simply a fact of flying skyward, the way the seatbelt sign was a fact. Some passengers noticed them. Most did not. The crew had been trained to wear them without making them a presence in the cabin, simply to carry them the way you carry something that keeps the record honest. A flight attendant named Keisha greeted them at the business class entrance early 40s with the kind of warmth that was clearly genuine, rather than performed the warmth of someone who has chosen this work because she believes it matters. She knew who they were. She had read the ethics board's training case not by name, but she recognized Elijah's face from the video she had watched in her mandatory training 6 weeks ago, the 47-second video that was now a standard part of the new employee dignity and de-escalation module. "Hi," she said to Elijah with the directness of someone addressing a person rather than a child. "What are you reading today?" He pulled the space book out of his backpack and showed her the cover. "I've actually been wanting to understand black holes," she said. "I always thought they were just like holes in space. Is that wrong?" "Pretty wrong," Elijah said, and his tone was not condescending. It was the friendly confidence of someone who has found something worth knowing and is glad to share it. "They're not empty at all. They're the densest things that exist. They have so much mass that they bend space itself around them." He thought for a moment. "It's more like imagine if a thing had so much gravity that it changed the shape of everything near it. That's what they do?" Keisha looked at him for a moment with an expression that was something more than polite interest. It was the expression of someone who has been given an image they are going to keep. "So the space changes around them," she said. "Yeah," Elijah said. "Everything near them is different." She smiled. "Good flight," she said, not to him and Naomi, to both of them equally as equally present people. "I'll be around if you need anything." She moved on. Naomi had heard the whole exchange from one seat away and said nothing, just looked out the window at the tarmac, at the ground crew moving with their orange batons at the conveyor belts and the luggage carts at the ordinary enormous machinery of departure. She was thinking about what Elijah had said. Everything near them is different, and about the way he had said it with the ease of someone for whom it was simply a fact about the physical world, not a metaphor for anything, just the nature of things that have enough gravity. The flight was smooth. Elijah read, asked her a question about the difference between a neutron star and a black hole. She gave an answer. He argued with one part of it on the grounds that the book said something slightly different. She conceded the point after he showed her the passage. He accepted the concession with a grin that was entirely 9 years old and entirely himself. They had orange juice. Elijah ate a granola bar from his backpack. At cruising altitude, the clouds below them were thick and white and moved slowly from this height like cotton. When he needed the bathroom, he unbuckled, said, "Excuse me," to the passenger across the aisle with easy, natural politeness and walked there by himself. Naomi watched him go, his green sneakers, his slight bounce when he walked, the way he moved through the cabin with the unhurried ease of a person who has no reason to be afraid of the space he is in. He was gone for 3 minutes. He came back, sat down, put his seatbelt back on, picked up his book. He did not look at her to check if she had seen. He did not need to check. It was just a thing that happened unremarkable. Ordinary a child using the bathroom on a plane, and the total unremarkableness of it was everything. That was the whole of what she had wanted. Not the verdict, not the press conference, not the stock price and the ethics board and the 340 complaints re-examined. Those were necessary, and she did not minimize them. But what she had wanted underneath all of it was this, her son walking through a cabin without flinching. She looked out the window. The lake was visible now, enormous and silver in the April afternoon, the city arranged at its edge in its particular ordered sprawl. Chicago arriving. She thought about the star that collapses and becomes something with more gravity, sending its beam of light into the dark with a regularity that doesn't vary, that refuses to stop, that keeps going long after the original star is gone. She thought about Devon's 11 entries. She thought about Diane's 4 paragraphs. She thought about the rocket sticker on the cover of the spacebook, pressed flat and permanent edges slightly soft now from 6 months of hands. She did not think about Brenda Hollis. There would be time to think about Brenda Hollis when Brenda Hollis required thinking about. Right now there was only the lake and her son reading beside her and the plane descending into the ordinary, irreplaceable fact of arriving somewhere safe. Deplaning. Elijah walked ahead of Naomi through the jet bridge with his spacebook under his arm and his backpack on his shoulders, and the rocket sticker catching the terminal light in small flashes as he moved, and there was nothing about the way he walked that suggested anything had ever happened to him. In an aisle very much like this one, not because it hadn't, but because he had walked through it and come out the other side, still himself, still bouncing slightly on his heels, still turning his head. When something in the terminal caught his attention, still fully and unguardedly the person he had been before someone decided that his presence somewhere required a response. At the gate, a young black mother with a toddler on her hip stopped Naomi with a hand on her arm and said quietly, her voice unsteady, in the way of someone who has been waiting to say something for a while. 2 months ago on a different airline? The attendant started getting loud at my son. Another passenger recorded it. Told us our rights. Said they'd seen what happened to your family and they weren't going to let it happen again. She paused, looked at Naomi steadily, looked at the toddler in her arms. Because of you, we kept our dignity. She didn't wait for an answer. She just nodded and moved on, and her toddler waved at Elijah, and Elijah waved back easy and natural the way you wave at a small child who waves at you. Naomi watched her go. Elijah had stopped ahead and was waiting for her with his hand out, patient and unhurried, and she took it, and they walked into the terminal together. Devon was promoted again 6 months after that, to a national training role, designing the dignity and de-escalation curriculum that every new skyward hire now completed before their first flight. He built the training around the concept of the record, what it means to document, what it means to speak, what it means to be the person who stays when everyone else walks away, and the first module opened with Devon's 11 time-stamped entries, reproduced in full without the names changed. Brenda served her sentence and was released on good behavior. She worked retail. She had not been on a plane in 7 months and would not be again, not in any capacity that required a federal certification. Frank Hollis served 14 months and was released into a world where the machinery he had operated for 16 years no longer existed in the form he had known it. The 340 complaints re-examined, and 31 of them resulting in formal settlements that would outlast him by decades, each settlement a record that had finally permanently been made to matter. That night in the Chicago hotel, Elijah opened his spacebook to the Event Horizon page, the dog-eared corner soft now from being folded and unfolded many times, the crease familiar under his thumb. This page that he had marked the first morning and returned to, and marked again and returned to again, over the months in which everything had changed and he had kept returning to it to see if it still said what he remembered. He read the passage one more time, once crossed. There is no return, not even for light. He thought about it in the way he always thought about it, seriously, fully, with the specific attention of someone for whom this fact has weight rather than being merely interesting. Then he closed the book, set it on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and slept, without dreaming of the aisle, only of the stars above it, enormous and indifferent, and burning with their particular light, each one doing what it was built to do, each one sending its signal into the dark for anyone with the patience and the instruments to receive it. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that speaking up, writing it down, and refusing to look away are how the record gets made, because the record is how the truth survives.